let's take a look now at how the markets are performing. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange is weaker so far today, with its global peers mixed as investors mull over disappointing U.S. private payrolls data. Investors are also still awaiting a key U.S. nonfarm payroll report to be released on Friday for more clues on the economic outlook. Maurice Madiba, Cloud Atlas CEO, joins us now to talk through these and the latest market developments. Mr. Madiba, welcome to the Daytime Update. If you could give us a sense of how the markets so far have been performing in intraday trade.
Yes, markets have been somewhat muted. We had moved a little bit into negative territory on the back of a few corporate actions in South Africa in the recent weeks. But what has really moved markets is global news. Oil price has taken a little bit of a dip as, there's new variants that are coming out, and vaccination rollouts, though they are quite strong and increasing, have not inspired that much confidence that people will be able to resume travel as per usual. And as usual, the U.S. data is quite important for us because we know that the U.S. Federal Reserve has pumped a lot of stimulus into the economy, something to the tune of 5.2 trillion US dollars. So, there was inflationary expectations on that money and what might happen, but also the outcome on the other side in terms of a stronger U.S. economy has not quite played itself out as would have been expected.
Now, gold prices were flat in early trade. Can you talk us through what is driving sentiments there?
So gold prices had been a lot flatter after we heard Jerome Powell speak about tapering and increasing some U.S. tapering. But the U.S. has been slammed with a few hurricanes and natural disasters, which has caused the gold price to go back above the $1,800 mark. And we're expecting it to remain there for a little bit of time until we get more data points on where the U.S. economy is headed. So gold for now would be range bound between 1,800 and 1,850 to the dollar.
We see that Sanlam has launched a 500 million rand infrastructure fund which aims to drive economic growth. Is this good news for the economy as well as investors? If you could talk us through perhaps how this fund was intended to work as well and who it aims to benefit.
Yes, so Sanlam is quite an interesting business, very comparable to the UK's Old Mutual in South Africa. One of the few success stories we have in the country in the insurance landscape. Infrastructure, as you know, as the African region, we have an infrastructure deficit of around 130 billion US dollars a year. So seeing that what's been funding infrastructure in the past has really been a combination of government and also Chinese investors through their Belt and Road. So having a local company, insurance company, which has a lot of cash on its books, looking at the infrastructure investment option is driven by two things. The first one is the pending change in Regulation 28, where infrastructure is now going to become a component of what pension funds are allowed to invest in. And Sanlam has a lot of exposure to South Africa's asset management industry. So having infrastructure projects, they're really going to drive some of the cash towards these infrastructure projects under this government dispensation. But what that means for South Africa is that we could see a lot more infrastructure projects coming to the fore, which would then drive jobs, stimulate the economy somewhat, and then increase that GDP growth rate that is quite low at the moment, but that we're looking to see get higher in the coming years.
We see automaker Toyota, they shocked the market by announcing that they would slash their output of cars for the month of September by 40%. And this is in comparison to the previous production plans that they had. What are the dynamics there? What led to that decision?
So, COVID has not been favorable to automakers, and we've seen quite a slump in sales, and especially new vehicle sales, where the market is starting to become saturated with respect to electric vehicles. So we're seeing a rise of electric vehicles not only in the Asian markets, but also in the US markets and UK markets. And this has overtaken new vehicle sales from your traditional internal combustion engines. which Toyota is still very strong on producing and making. So it's not a surprise that they would cut back on production as they try to refocus their resources internally to look at how do they deliver just in time for this new industry that's taking the globe by storm.
As we wrap up very quickly for this afternoon, I want to ask you this before we leave. There's a court bid by the former owners of a shoe retailer, Tekkie Town, to have the retailer Steinhoff declared insolvent and liquidated. That started in the Western Cape High Court. What have we heard so far from these proceedings?
Yeah, it's quite a challenging one. The owner of Tekkie Town, which is very much a cash business, as you would remember, some of the stores and some of them are still around. But the owner, when he was selling the business, was approached by Steinhoff, and he exchanged, instead of selling the business for cash, he sold the business for shares in Steinhoff. And at that point, I think Steinhoff shares were around 180, 200 rand per share. They're now trading at 20 cents. So you can see the total value destruction that Tekkie Town, even as a business, has had to experience because of the fact that they sold equity and control of their business for shares in an otherwise dubious or proven to be dubious operation, which was Steinhoff. So as the court bid starts off, I'm not sure on the rate of success, but we're looking at numbers of around 1.2 billion. Steinhoff already has a long list of creditors that it would need to settle before it looks at Tekkie Town. As the Tekkie Town team and their advisors had taken up equity in the business, it tends to be subordinated to other sorts of debt. So even if there is a declaration of insolvency for Steinhoff, which is highly unlikely, the best that the owner could look for is to regain control of his business.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Maurice Madiba, for today's market update. He is CEO of Cloud Atlas.